Hey there, team, and welcome to another update on the situation in Iceland. Today is Wednesday, September 11th. It is about 10:15 a.m. here Mountain Time, about 4:15 in the afternoon in Iceland. I am Geology Professor Shawn Willsey. Thanks for joining me today. As you well know, the eruption that began on August 22nd has now concluded, and we are in this interim period between eruptions. But we'll look at a few bits of data. There's some new INSAR imagery that's come out, which I think is interesting, as well as a few news stories. Thanks as always to Amanda Joe over in Iceland for helping me prepare this update and for compiling some of the information. She does great work for us. So let's start with our good friend Isak did a flight over the area with his thermal drone within the last couple of days, and I'll put a link to his YouTube page in the description. You should definitely subscribe. He does great work getting imagery, but this actually shows us some nice footage of the vent, or at least one of the two vents that was active. And you can see here on the right, the brighter colors there correspond to areas that are still hot. So even though the landscape looks largely static and dead, I suppose, solidified, there is still quite a bit of residual heat beneath that crust. Rock is a great insulator, and so we expect that this lava field and these volcanic vents will retain that heat, and it will take some number of years, most likely, for them to cool off completely. Some of these places are still going to be quite hot to the touch. Definitely not a place you want to go out and explore. There's still molten lava beneath this solidified crust. This is not a landscape to go explore and walk on for the time being. It's going to take some time for this to cool off completely and solidify. But you can see that these previously active volcanic vents are now completely inactive, with no more lava or volcanic material being pumped to the surface. So yeah, I encourage you to watch some of his videos. He does great work as always. And he and I, I'm sure, will circle back again at some time in the future and do more work together. I thought that was a great first run of combining his great videography and drone flying skills with some of the information I can provide as well. Let's run through just a couple other things here. There is a new Met Office update that came out yesterday, September 10th. Magma accumulation resumes beneath Svartsengi. The lava flow front, even though the eruption had ended, that flow front was still a little bit active, a little bit of a glow, some moss that was burning there. And that can go on for a couple of days, but the eruption is considered over even if there is still residual lava out on the lava field, because there's no additional lava being pumped out to the surface feeding that flow front. So it's expected to more or less diminish over the next few days. So the big highlights here: magma accumulation, rate of uplift is similar to what we've seen previously with the May 29th eruption and event. Lava flow, as we said, still active and is unstable. There's a risk of collapsing from it. So that's, again, just warning to keep people away from that active flow front. Eruption site is dangerous. So again, they're trying to keep the curious folks from wandering out there, possibly injuring themselves and then necessitating some sort of rescue or whatnot. So they do say here, let's see if I can make this a little bit bigger. There we go. Rate of uplift similar to that of the previous events. Magma, while it accumulates, magma propagation and even an eruption can be expected. It's too soon to predict whether or when the next event might occur. That's true. We're a long ways out from the next eruption based on how long it takes to sort of refill the system and pressurize it sufficiently. Lava flow front still active even though the eruption is over. It can be expected to creep forward over the next few days, and there's still a risk of collapse from it. It can, it can move a little bit, so you don't want to be walking on that thin crust if there's hot rock or magma beneath it. So and the hazard map's still basically the same. So a very short and brief update from the Met Office. If we switch over to seismic activity and earthquakes around the eruption site north and northeast of Grindavik, nothing, nada, zilch. Little cluster of very small quakes over near Fagradalsfjall. We've seen those on and off. Those are kind of regular, nothing alarming there. They're very small, not a ton of them. And really not much happening over near the Krishuvik system near Lake Klevravatn either. There's maybe a couple of, looks like there's a magnitude 2 and like a 1.4, just isolated quakes, most likely related to the tectonic stress, the extension that's going on across this plate boundary. And then I think there was a couple, oh, maybe not, down off the tip as well. If we look at the last week or so, earthquake-wise, oh, let's go to that one. I got the wrong one there. Yeah, same sort of thing. There was a little cluster out here. Just business as usual, I would say, across this plate boundary. Actually, if anything, the last week has been probably a little slower than normal when we look at just the overall seismicity of the area. So pretty slow on the Reykjanes for the last week. Switching over to the GPS, starting with the Svartsengi station, which is the one we like to look at the most. Moving my little face out of the way a bit for you. Looking at the uplift data, which accumulated over the summer, and then we had the August 22nd eruption where magma was poured out onto the surface as lava, so the area experienced significant down dropping and subsidence. The land sunk as that material and volume and mass was brought to the surface. And we had initially a little bit of a downturn in the GPS data, but that's swung back up now. And now it's kind of going through this kind of flat and ramp little system. There's a, it was flat down here, ramped up a little bit. Looks like it was more or less flat, or at least gentle gradient. And these last 4 or 5 points here show a little bit of an uptick there. And that's what we probably expect to see going forward. All the other stations show very similar trends to that one, to the Svartsengi station. And if we go to the 4-hour runs, which give us a few more data points to look at, albeit with maybe a little bit bigger error bars using the scale that they show there. Yeah, here we go. Svartsengi with the 4-hour run. You can see that same sort of trend there. So kind of like flatlining, ramping up a little bit, flatlining, and then it looks like maybe a little bit of an uptick there. So the big takeaway is there is definitive inflation and more magma moving into the subsurface storage area. So that can be borne out by the GPS data, but the INSAR data shows it as well. So we have a fresh run from the satellites. And I do want to give a quick shout out to a viewer, Eric Fielding, who works for JPL in Pasadena, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Actually, we had a quick conversation and he sent me an email and he helped me understand a little bit better what some of these mean. So these S1 prefixes here on these this INSAR data for these interferograms. This is Sentinel-1 satellite, and they have a certain wavelength or contour spacing that shows the uplift for those. The CSK ones are the Cosmos SkyMed satellite, which is mainly run, it's an Italian consortium that runs that one, if I remember correctly. And then TSX is the TerraSAR X satellite, and that's mainly coming out of folks in companies and maybe the government too in Germany. So that's the three. I never knew what those were, so that was very helpful. So I appreciate Eric for kind of providing a little bit of information for me on all these abbreviations here. So the first 3 letters gives you which satellite data you're looking at. Then we have the location, full Iceland area. In this case, like Reykjanes, south, you can see there's some abbreviations there for the area it's showing. Then there might be some more sub-abbreviations for where exactly it's showing the data. And then the last string of numbers on each one of these is the date run. So 2024, the first pass of the satellite on September 1st, and then a subsequent pass, in this case, on September 10th. And so if we go ahead and click on that one, what you can see here, what nicely pops already, even though we're only a few days out from this eruption completely ending, we're already starting to see strong inflationary signals that the magma is moving into the subsurface with this INSAR data. So the GPS and the INSAR data both showing the same trend of inflation here around this area just to the northwest of Grindavik, just near the power plant in the Blue Lagoon area. That's where we believe the magma storage zone is. Of course, the eruptions are occurring over here, so there's some sort of pathway and conduit system from this magma storage zone here. When the eruptions take place, that magma moves through some sort of plumbing conduits, pipeline through the cracks in the rock and then erupts in this region over here. You can see the distortion of the INSAR data because this is where some of the existing and active lava fields are. So it's a little bit more distorted over here, but clearly a pretty nice bullseye symbol right around this area here, which agrees with the GPS data. So cool to see that, and just a fun graphical way to show that INSAR data. Last little bit of things here in the news, and so this was an interesting article here, and I'll put links to these in the description. Nothing in the data says this is going away. Realize all these articles were originally in Icelandic and have been Google translated to English, so sometimes the quotes sound a little odd for English speakers because of the translation issue. So talking to Benedict Ofigsen, who works for the Met Office and heads up the ground deformation division of that organization. It looks similar to the last eruption. The land area is actually more, and now there is no flow out, only in, so there's no eruptive material coming out of the system. We just have the influx of magma in the subsurface. When asked the question, aren't there signs that it will make headlines again in a few weeks? He says, with no guarantee like this, I would shoot in 3 months. It seems that the time between eruptions is always getting longer. So in the second half of November, we can perhaps start to position ourselves for everything unchanged compared to previous history. So he's looking at, a good 2 more months time, well into November, before we might be getting into the time frame and the volume and pressurization of the magma chamber is sufficient that another eruption is possible. Could go well into December though as well. So he says we're preparing for the eruption to be big and start with a bang. That's what we've seen with the past few as well. Presumably it will start in similar areas, but there's always an uncertainty as to how it will spread. So not sure exactly where along that northeast southwest trend that we've seen in the past with these other eruptions, where it's going to erupt. We might see some evidence with earthquakes and the GPS data as that gets closer. So, and then he also says, kind of going to the last thing here, we see a trend that there's a longer interval between eruptions. It's more difficult for the magma to come up, and it may be an indication that it's coming to an end, but difficult to predict. And so that's interesting. So he's not saying it's going to end or stop, but it could, which could well be the case. I think given the number of eruptions we've had in that short period of time, maybe not though. And then I did dig up just for fun. It made me think back to a previous news story we talked about. So this is from March 15th, where there were 2 Icelandic geologists, Haraldur Sigurdsson and Grimur Bjornsson, that were looking at, and I was always curious because they were using such limited data, but they looked at the first couple of eruptions, diminished output, and extrapolated out that they thought the eruption would totally be over by August, which obviously was not the case because we're past August now and we're seeing signs of an intrusion. But this was, billed at the time as, an end to the unrest near Grindavik. And so this forecast does not seem true right now. Maybe it will be true within a few months or so. But the nice thing about this kind of data set is you can make a prediction, make a extrapolation, but then get the new data and then maybe adjust to that. So yeah, they said they predict the disturbance near Grindavik will conclude by late summer in 4 to 5 months. Yeah, so that has not borne out to be accurate, and that's sort of the danger with these forecasts. Is I would just veer on the side of caution and not even go there. At a minimum, I'd want a lot more data before we try to start to model future behavior of these volcanoes. So interesting nonetheless. So that's our Iceland update for today. Looking forward, I might do 1 or 2 of these a week, just whenever there's something to share with you. I am trying to schedule a date with Professor Thordarson to do another interview with him. I want to start talking to him about some of the other volcanoes in Iceland. Still, of course, looking a little bit at the Reykjanes area, but I'd like to learn more about some of these other volcanoes that I only know a little bit about. So I'd like to draw on his expertise and learn more about Katla and Hekla and Askja and some of these other volcanoes, these central volcanoes that we see in the main interior of the country that are a very different type of volcanic system because they have much more explosive behavior and can have a much bigger and more dramatic impact when they erupt. So look for some of that on the forefront along with some of my other regular videos, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for your support. I appreciate you.